The legal basis for adoption of the 2020 federal election paper ballot voting plan. The Elections Clause of the U.S. Constitution is the primary source of constitutional authority to regulate elections for the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. This clause makes the states primarily responsible for regulating congressional elections, as it vests ultimate power in Congress. Further, a principle is created whereby the Congress must satisfy certain requirements or follow certain procedures in order to vote. A court must determine whether it is reasonable regulation of the electoral process. The Elections Clause of the U.S. Constitution says the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but Congress may at time make or alter such regulations, except as to the place of choosing senators. The 12th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution provides the procedure for electing the President and the Vice President, replacing the procedure spelled out in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution. This amendment specified how electors must cast distinct votes for the presidency and the vice presidency. The President as law enforcer is spelled out in the U.S. Constitution under the powers of the President. The Constitution says, "He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed." With regards to those laws involving elections that the President has a duty to enforce, notwithstanding the aforementioned 12th Amendment as well as the 22nd Amendment, the President is required to assure laws designed to prevent malfeasance by election officials acting under color of law, such as diluting valid ballots with invalid ones, so-called ballot box stuffing, rendering false vote tabulations, or preventing valid voter registrations or votes from being given effect in any election, as well as in elections where federal candidates are on the ballot, are enforced. Assuring laws forbidding the qualifying of fictitious individuals to vote in federal elections by placing fictitious names on voter registration rolls or through color of law in any election are followed. And assuring registering to vote or voting in a federal election by persons who are not entitled to vote under applicable state law, most notably persons who have committed serious crimes and persons who are not United States citizens, is prohibited. Moreover, the President must exercise due care to assure the Enforcement Act of 1870 is enforced, which prohibited discrimination by state officials in voter registration on the basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. It established penalties for interfering with a person's right to vote and gave federal courts the power to enforce the act. The act also authorized the President to employ the use of the Army to uphold the act and the use of federal marshals to bring charges against offenders for election fraud, the bribery or intimidation of voters, and conspiracies to prevent citizens from exercising their constitutional rights. The act banned the use of terror, force, or bribery to prevent people from voting because of their race. Furthermore, the President is required to assure the Enforcement Act of 1871, formerly an act to enforce the rights of citizens of the United States to vote in several states of this Union, permitted federal oversight of local and state elections if any two citizens in a town with more than 20,000 inhabitants desired it be enforced. In addition, the Enforcement Act of 1871, the third Enforcement Act passed by Congress and also known as the Ku Klux Klan Act, formerly an act to enforce the provisions of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States and for other purposes, made state officials liable in federal court for depriving anyone of their civil rights or the equal protection of laws. It further made a number of the KKK's intimidation tactics into federal offenses, authorized the President to call out the militia to suppress conspiracies against the operation of the federal government, and prohibited those suspected of complicity in such conspiracy to serve on juries related to the Klan's activities. The act also authorized the president to suspend the writ of habeas corpus if violence rendered efforts to suppress the Klan ineffective. The president is obligated to take care that this law is adhered to faithfully. The founding fathers, in their wisdom, were concerned about faithless government entities refusing to follow the laws of the land. Since the beginning of June 2020, our nation has been witness to scores of faithless elected officials pronouncing illegal and unconstitutional directives to the law enforcement under their command to disregard their duty to maintain peace in order for an orgy of leftist violence to be allowed to continue unabated, oftentimes on a nightly basis. The Transition Integrity Project. It was also in June of 2020 when a group calling themselves the Transition Integrity Project formed, with the machinations of the evil socialist puppet master Soros in the wings. Through the Open Society Group's connections to the group's founder, Rosa Brooks, this group met and engaged in a gaming exercise where they went over scenarios that might occur in the immediate aftermath of the November 2020 election. Made up of 80 or so political operatives, these people met online and discussed the various possibilities about the election. Of note is that John Podesta, former advisor to Hillary Clinton in her 2016 campaign, was acting as Biden in the scenario. As such, Podesta opined Biden would not concede the election, but instead would persuade Democratic governors, say those in Wisconsin or Michigan, to send pro-Biden electors to the Electoral College, which would be termed faithless electors. In this scenario, Podesta advised California, Oregon, and Washington state would all threaten to secede from the Union if Biden were not put into office. Podesta finished this scenario noting they would sit back and wait to see what the military would do. On 26 August 2020, NBC News reported Hillary Clinton said in a new interview that Joe Biden should not concede the 2020 election under any circumstances, and advised that they should drag out the election as long as possible and be relentless in their efforts to win. Her attitude is indicative of her wish to gain power at any cost. The hubris of these people is stunning. The response from our president should be for him to invoke the provisions of the Insurrection Act of 1807. It is a federal law, United States federal law, that empowers the President of the United States to deploy U.S. military and federalized National Guard troops within the United States in particular circumstances, such as to suppress civil disorder, insurrection, and rebellion. The Act provides a statutory exception to the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, which limits the use of military personnel under federal command for law enforcement purposes within the United States. Because if every American cannot see that advocating secession, meeting to plan such activities, and advising one of the two major presidential candidates to engage in doing whatever it takes to win at all costs is not insurrection, then we have sadly jumped the shark as a society. On a positive note, the 2020 USA federal election voting plan is the one method which can assure a just election, and the one thing that will assure those advocating open rebellion have no ammunition. One only hopes it will be utilized. And after a just election, the officials in place will hopefully opt to investigate and fully prosecute those nefarious persons who have worked and will continue to work for the subversion of our just election process, along with peace and law and order in our country. For the love of God and all that is holy, we can only hope so. This slide and the slide that follows are references on the legal basis for the adoption of the 2020 USA federal election paper ballot voting plan. Should this plan be something that you believe should be enacted, please reference other companion presentations on the YouTube channel With Freedom Comes Responsibility, and let everyone you know about this project, as well especially those people who might know someone who's in a decision-making capacity, in order to get this enacted as rapidly as possible to make sure that we have a fair and just election. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. God bless you, and God bless America.